you guys sent this video in. Let's do a shorter video, okay? It's called Why Modern America Creates Fragile Children. Not enough calcium. Huh? Your bones get weak. And you become physically, actually fragile. There's your answer.
Every generation loves to complain about the generation coming along.
That's true.
But at the same time, there's a very sharp change with kids who were born in 1995 and afterwards. Surprisingly
what's the change?
sharp. Beginning with kids born in 1995, they spend a lot less.
So that's not me. All right. So now I'm allowed to talk about this video because I'm not one of the whiny liberal babies. I'm a man born in 1990.
Time going out with friends. They don't get a driver's license as often. They don't drink as much. They don't go out on
loser! They don't fucking drink. You freaking loser. Yeah, they're probably less social. There'll be technology has had a pretty significant impact on us in a way that makes people a little bit lazier. Yeah, sure.
They don't work for money as much.
Oh,
what are they doing?
What are they working for?
They
Peanuts?
spend a lot more time sitting on their beds with their devices.
No, they're laying on their beds. Work for pay. Okay, I was just looking to see. Okay.
What are they doing? They're spending a lot more time sitting on their beds with their devices, interacting that way.
True. And I would also say that there is an interesting shift, at least from what I've noticed. I could be wrong. But talking to my mommy and stuff. No, but it feels like nowadays it takes longer to grow up. I mean, there are less job opportunities for people to operate in, and we're being pushed into staying at the college as if it's 13th grade now. There's like a literal like pipeline that forces to go to school. What do you want to do with your life? I don't know. Go to college. You'll figure it out. You won't, by the way. If you know what you want to do, pursue it. If you don't, 2 years in college is not a terrible idea. Get your what is it called? Your associates in like liberal arts, because you get rid of all the BS that you know, in case you figure it out. But like that's what happens, and so you're moving out later and later because things are getting more and more expensive. We do absolutely have a housing crisis. It's insane how much money it costs to get a house. You know, some of these struggles are actually absolutely technology driven, but some of these are just, I hate to be the capitalism bad guy, but some of it's just the way that we operate. Some of our capitalism needs to reflect more like the, the old Nordic models. So kids are growing up slower, I think, for sure. But I think a lot of it is, I guess, by design at this point, where you're keeping your kids in the fucking house for so long. You're not giving people opportunities to leave the house and grow up. So
these are the first kids who got social media when they were 13, roughly. They were subjected to much more anti-bullying content in their schools, much more adult supervision. They were raised in the years after 9/11. They were given much less.
That's a good point. That's probably why there is more adult supervision. But
recess and free play with no child left behind. There was much more testing pushed down into earlier grades. So in a lot of ways, Gen Z has been denied the independence, the independent play that previous generations got.
Maybe.
Gen Z has been raised with what's called moral dependency. There's always been an adult there for them to go to, and so we don't know if this is for sure the reason, but they seem to have more difficulty working out problems on their own.
This is interesting because I don't know how much of this is real. I think that this person is proposing this as more as a theory, but you know, how many joking TikToks do we see about like a bunch of older people, like in their young 20s, going, making jokes about how they can't call their doctor and they ask mommy to do it, even though they're grown adults. There might be some truth to this. I think that there are definitely other factors. Most things are a combination of multiple factors. Like I brought up before, it's difficult to get out of the house and get a decent job now with automation and wages getting driven down and houses getting driven up and houses are driving. That's scary. Okay. But this is an interesting conversation.
When we protect children from unpleasantness, from conflicts, from insults, from teasing, from exclusion, we are setting them up to be weak, to be more easily damaged, to be more easily discouraged.
Maybe. I get what you're saying. People that, fundamentally speaking, stress isn't bad. As long as it's not too much stress to recover from. This is a fundamental when it comes to like working out. You want to find that balance between working out enough and not working out too much and getting enough recovery time. And the same thing, I suppose, could be said about, I guess, I wouldn't say, I guess, bullying or stressful social interactions. But I don't know that you have to. But I just feel like it frames trying to protect kids from being bullied as a bad thing when it's not. You don't need bullying to exist to have stressful social interactions. There's already plenty of ways to do that. You know, just for a kid trying to speak out in front of like an assembly room or something can be stressful enough, and that might not be a bad thing to put kids in front of the class and have them do stuff like that. You don't need to get bullied to be a little bit stronger. Life is hard enough, right? So, especially if you're trying to have a society that doesn't say bullying is good, you know, I guess they wouldn't necessarily need to accommodate that stress, I suppose. Okay. Okay. So what do you do?
In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. The fear was stoked by cable TV. Was getting safe. In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. The fear was stoked by cable TV in the 1980s. There were a few high-profile abductions.
Last year, 50,000 children disappeared, many of them from nice, safe neighborhoods.
It's okay. Come on, hop in.
Talk to your children about not talking to strangers, and do it today.
But it's not until the 1990s.
The only thing I'm having trouble with this specifically is that we used to, there was a campaign, I believe it started in the 1960s, because I'm looking it up right now, where they had to start asking parents, do you know where your fucking kid is? Do you guys remember that?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
This was a real thing that we put on news television, I believe starting in the 1960s. And so I'm obviously not super well versed in all the information, but it sounds to me like it was so bad. Parents were so unaware of what their children were doing that they had to put a commercial on basically that said, "Hey, where's your fucking kid?" And the people were like, "Oh fuck, I don't know," because you used to lock your kid outside all day, and it's like, "Oh, but did we let the dogs in?" You know, I remember telling my mom, it's like, yeah, we used to, my mom would, her mother and father would just lock them outside. That was just how things were. You just lock them outside, go play around in the dirt, whatever. And I did that too for some of when I was younger as well. But that kind of changes. That might have changed because of 9/11. I don't really know. I don't really remember. So I'm thinking maybe that was a problem. You don't remember that? That was on fucking TV. Is that not on TV anymore? That shit was wild, dude. This shit was fucking astronomical.
That we really start locking kids up and saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. Lenore Skenazy, who wrote the book Free Range Kids, she became famous as America's worst mom because in 2009, she let her 9-year-old son ride the New York City subway. Not only did he survive, he was thrilled. He felt he'd learned something. He felt he could go out into the world.
That's cool. Didn't the guy just get choked to death because he was homeless and, you know, threatening other people? I mean, I don't know. Regardless of which side you take in that situation, you'd be like, I don't want my kid outside by themselves. I don't think it's smart to have a fucking 9-year-old take the subway. Maybe an airplane I could be okay with, as long as I could help them depart and somebody was there to pick them up. I could do an airplane. But the fucking subway, bro? Or maybe he's talking about the subway with Jared, and that's even worse. There are no safe subways, guys. What the fuck are you talking about? I don't know. This is like, that's, I understand what he's saying because, you know, again, if you can overcome some particular adversity, you know, or you get through a stressful situation, you come out the other side better. But that's not a good example to me. A 9-year-old? Yeah, a 9-year-old.
We took this essential period of childhood from about 8 to 12, when kids throughout history have practiced independence, have gotten into adventures, have made rafts and floated down the Mississippi River.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't let my kid do that. That's scary.
We took that period and said, you don't get to practice independence until it's too late, until that period is over.
Like 13 is too late? I feel like that's no way.
Now, a couple years before you go to college, now you can go outside. Oh, okay, go off to college. And a lot of them are not ready.
I listen, I'm sure that, like, I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that's all what it is. I mean, absolutely, there has to be a factor of parents being very protective because they want their kids to be okay. I agree with that. I'm sure that there's a level of that. But I feel like it's not just this whole thing where, like, we're not letting 9-year-olds in the fucking subway. That's a little bit crazy to me. I don't think that that's the primary issue. I think social media keeps kids inside. Video games keep kids inside. They don't want to go outside as much anymore. Kids don't want to go outside as much. And maybe 9/11 is also a factor. But kids, people are perfectly content staying inside. And then there is also the safety aspect in the way that we socially educate some people. It tends to be a little scary sometimes, very hyperbolic. I mean, just fundamentally, STDs, sex. What we used to learn in class, when I learned, you'll die if you have sex. You're going to get an STD and you're going to fucking die and you're going to have a baby and you're going to be dead. That's what you used to learn in health class. Probably not the right message or very accurate. And that's kind of how we taught some stuff in general, and so maybe that's a scary part. We teach stranger danger, and maybe sometimes we teach it to an extent that it makes people afraid. But okay.
They're just not used to being independent.
Nowadays, we're not having 8 kids, so if like 2 of them die, we have 6 left. We only have a couple kids now. So
when they get to college, they need more help. They're asking adults for more help. Protect me from this. Punish him for saying that. Protect me from that book. Students are thinking in terms of safety and danger. Students say, by their own admission, they are more fragile. They use a language of fragility, weakness.
What does that mean?
Trauma, triggering. They see triggers all over the world. What are triggers? Triggers are cases where you take a part of your nervous system.
I don't think it's because that we've had kids inside too much. I think that has to do with a lot of social media, like allowing people to just talk about whatever the fuck they want without any real actual, like generally speaking, real consequence. And then people can talk. And then now with the justifiably so age where we're acknowledging and respecting people with mental health issues, now some people can either can lie about having a mental health issue and be like, oh my god, I'm a victim, because we do have a victim complex. And I think that's because social media glorifies a victim mentality. That's not to say that there aren't real issues, because there are. But like, I have ADHD. I was a very behavioral child. I probably have OCD as well. I definitely have tics. I have like a lot of obsessive compulsive behaviors. But like nowadays, if people would brag about it. Nowadays, like I only bring up ADHD when it's relevant to the stream and whatnot, or like a little silly fun. People nowadays, I have ADHD, I can't do that. I can't. They'll say I can't. And back when I was growing up, I didn't want it to be something that got in the way of my progress, because I felt ashamed of it, which is probably a little too much. But there's probably like a healthy balance between ashamed and the glorification of it, or using it as an excuse maker. But I think a lot of this is like the weird way that we interact on social media. And also, again, part of it's just because like parents want to keep their kids safe too, for sure. But okay.
And you say, if someone says that word, they can control my nervous system and make me afraid and anxious.
I'm gonna cry.
That's a terrible idea. We should not be teaching our kids to see the world as being full of triggers.
That's
we
fair.
should teach them to live in a world that is
fair.
physically quite safe, but full of offensive statements and ideas.
Maybe the teaching part of, we don't want to teach kids to live in a world of triggers. I like that. I don't know if this is what it means, but to me, what that means is that you can, I don't know if it is absolutely possible to instill trauma into a person. Everybody will have a different relationship with a potentially traumatic event, and I know this is like really small scale, but have you ever had a baby fall down? Stupid idiot, and it falls down and like on its butt, and it's just like kind of chilling, and then you go, oh no, and then they start crying. Like that, I feel like sometimes might be the way that we interact in the real world, where like maybe somebody gets like a little bit of a boo-boo, and then we're like, oh my god, are you okay? And we feed into it a little too much. And that feeding into it could potentially become a problem. And the suggestion that like everything is traumatic. Like, do you remember a while ago, this was a couple of years ago, we had that situation with like Killick. He was like a 17-year-old. And the B family the B family boy was 16 and then the girl was 15. And in that conversation, what had happened was that Killick and the brother, they were shit talking each other and they were trolling each other. And then Killick basically made like a your sister joke, like, oh, your sister's like a porn star or something. He thought that she was older, but whatever. She's 15, he's 17. It's not necessarily appropriate, but he's not doing anything predatory. And it turned into like this huge thing. And I remember saying like, yeah, it's not a big it's not good. It's disrespectful, and you shouldn't do that. But this isn't something that would create a trauma for her. And be like, no, you're wrong. You don't know what trauma. Trauma is this. And it's like, no, you're an idiot. That's not going to create a trauma. But telling somebody that could instill, like, they're like, oh, is this supposed to be upsetting? And then honestly, you can really encourage that kind of like almost a traumatic experience from something like that. To the point where she's crying because some fucking 17-year-old kid made a joke that she didn't even hear to her brother about how she's a porn star, and it was pretty much that was it. There's nothing traumatic about that. It's annoying, it's disrespectful, but it was like, yeah, we're gaslighting babies. It's like, what the fuck? And like that's what we're talking about here. And it's something interesting about mental health. And like, I'm more familiar with mental health than most people. My wife's a behavioral specialist. Have you guys ever heard me say that before? But this is the kind of conversations we have, and we talk about this stuff. It's very interesting. I forgot where I was going to go with that point. Fuck, I forgot where I was going to go with that point. I had like a really good point, I thought. No, I guess I didn't, because I can't think. The point I'm trying to make is that you absolutely can encourage somebody to have like to think that something is worse than it actually is. And when I said like this isn't really that big of a deal, and people are like, no, you don't understand trauma, it's like, well, I think that I probably do a little better than like the 20-year-olds on the internet. And this is what I think that we're kind of speaking to. It's like it's a culmination of very almost like small complex factors. But I would say, yeah, for sure, this is kind of happening in different ways and different capacities. For sure. I think that this is kind of one of those things where you can encourage somebody to almost have some kind of an issue, you know? So.
Especially on the internet. The bottom line is that if we want to raise a generation of kids who can deal with diversity of all kinds, who can go out into a world that's physically actually quite safe,
thank you so much for the 5-month small gut. Papa is your wife behavioral specialist. Yeah, I don't know if you guys ever heard me say that. It's relevant to the conversations. Okay, give me a fucking break. And I love my wife and I'm proud of her, so give me a break. All right.
Of offensive content.
Skid widget? Thank you.
We need to get our educational practices in line with some very basic, important psychological principles. We are all prone to motivated reasoning and the confirmation bias, and we're all prone to tribalism and black and white thinking.
True.
We need to be educating kids so that they do less of this stuff.
Sure, I agree with that.
Always trust your feelings. It may sound wise, it may sound romantic. But wise people around the world have noticed that we don't react to the world as it actually is. We react to the constructions, the perceptions. Epictetus said, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our interpretations of things.
Interesting.
All of us have had experiences of these. One thing I like to think about is Homer Simpson saying,
"Shut up, brain, or I'll stab you with a Q-tip."
Our brains do this. Our brains go on and on. And we're like, stop it, stop it, stop it. What we've begun seeing on campus is that students are encouraged to follow their feelings. If they feel offended by something, then they have been attacked. They're supposed to not question those feelings. But part of wisdom is the ability to say, now, wait a second.
I can't really speak if this is like a real thing. I hear people talk about all the time about how like there's an issue on college campuses of like kids getting like say like all these like, different issues, and they're too liberal now, blah blah blah. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or just an overreaction from conservatives. I will say, oh, I'm going to die. That's what I'm going to say. Well, I guess I'm just going to die. I will say when I went to my brother-in-law's graduation, it felt a little too like progressive and like weird and preachy and like virtue signaling, where like nobody necessarily cared about any of the issues they were talking about, specifically the teachers, not even the students. But I don't know how bad college is. I guess I'll find out when I fucking become an adult, when I have kids, right? But
and are there other ways to look at this? These are crucial skills for critical thinking. These are crucial skills for mental health. And we need to be teaching young people at all stages to question their first interpretations, look for evidence, and improve the way they interpret the world.
Okay.
CBT is just a way of teaching people skills to do exactly that, to question their feelings, to look for evidence. So in CBT, you learn the names of these distortions, about 15 or so distortions. You can guess what they mean. Catastrophizing, black and white thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. Black white thinking. You have like a very extreme perspective on something, either yes or no. Catastrophizing sounds like you're over sensationalizing something. Discounting the positive. What does that sound like? You're trying to underplay how positive something is. Emotional reasoning. Is that like trying to process some kind of emotional thing? Filtering. Label. Okay.
Labeling. Mind reading.
I think that people label all the time. Is mind reading just assuming what somebody's thinking based on like their actions?
Aaron Beck, a psychiatrist in the 1960s, noticed that depressed and anxious people have a way of constructing these beliefs that I'm bad, the future is bad, my future, the world is a bad place, and they're mutually reinforcing. And this is the way the world feels to them. And if you can improve their thinking and break up those beliefs, they're released from the depression. Cognitive behavioral therapy is not more effective than several other treatments. Most treatments are about equally effective, but it's so easy to learn. Other techniques like meditation work, but they're harder. Most people drop off. So CBT is easy, really well tested, has a huge impact on a variety of mental illnesses, especially those related to depression and anxiety. We think every college student, and heck, every high school student, should be taught these basic skills.
Is he saying that is he pitting like cognitive behavioral therapy versus medication? Wouldn't you do both at the same time? I guess I don't really know. But wouldn't you do both cognitive behavioral therapy with medication at the same time so you can alleviate some of the short-term the symptoms that are existing now while also trying to almost reprogram somebody's like frame of thought? And then I can't imagine that cognitive behavioral therapy would be, is it massively successful? I feel like this is something you have to do for your entire life. CBT alone is 50 to 75% effective for overcoming depression and anxiety after 5 to 15 modules. Oh, okay, interesting. What is the severity of that though? Of the people who had depression and anxiety? Was it clinical depression and anxiety, or was it just feelings of depression and anxiety? Because now we're getting into like a whole fucking conversation. What's the proportionality of this? Okay, let me keep going.
Given how high the rates of anxiety and depression are today.
Sure, I think part of that social media though, because now you have access to every bad thing that's always going on in the entire world at every time at your fingertips, and people are like kind of like shitting their pants. Like even and this is something that like is very new for me. I voted in like a local election recently. And what was bizarre was it's the first time that I voted and I felt, this is so weird to say, an animosity towards the people who didn't vote the way I did, which is toxic, and I know that. So like I guess it would be considered some kind of a prejudice that I would like, oh, that's not good. But it's interesting because there was like an issue where an issue with like an LGBT like a flag was banned from like this like a local school or something. Well, it's not or something. It was that. And there was a teacher who was I think they might have been gay, or a principal that left because of like how toxic things were getting. And I was like, shit, like obviously this is, I know who's in the right here. And so I voted for the person that would have, on the, I guess the school board that would have helped reverse this bullshit. And the people who didn't vote my way, I was like, I don't know if I like them. I don't know who they were, but I was like, it was the first time I've ever gotten like such a hateful feeling about that. I don't know if that's relevant to the video, but it was interesting. Don't do that though, guys. All right, we're all people.
Life is a battle between good people and evil people.
Probably not. Most of the people.
If you think about it for a moment, who are we? What is our species? I don't know. We evolved in small-scale societies that were locked in struggle with other small-scale societies. Human nature is really, really finely tailored for intergroup conflict, for tribal warfare. This is the way our ancestors lived for a long time. Now that we've transcended it, we're so desperate for it, we've invented team sports, fraternities. We love these sorts of competitions. Our brains are made for it. Now, it can be fun, or it can get dark, and it can lead to racism, all kinds of forms of bigotry.
Yeah, sure. Somebody that said, don't be a toxic voter. No, I know. I think that's the thing, though, is part of the things that happen, especially as you get older, is you sort of care more. And in either direction, right? So it's hard to disconnect yourself a little bit, and you have to do it because you're like, this matters a lot to me, and that's why people get so upset when they're voting for a particular thing or voting a particular way.
But on some college campuses and in some high schools, we see forms of education, forms of training that teach students to make more and more distinctions, to see more and more binary dimensions between people, where the people who are high are bad, the people who are low are good. When we talk about identity politics...
I understand what he's saying. I mean, he's basically talking about systemic racism. But I think that this is the problem, because I get what he's saying, and I don't think I disagree with what he's saying. Because I used to not think about race ever, for better or for worse, for the most part. You know, I never looked at a black person when I was younger as any different than me. And then I got older, and, you know, you get a little bit more impacted by social conversations, and they start to scare you. Ooh. And they start to change you, right? And you're like, oh my God, now you look at everything as if they're literally black and white. And any other, you know, ethnicity or whatnot. And it's interesting, but at the same time, there is a power imbalance that is because of a history of systemic racism, and you feel like you have to acknowledge that. You can't just not. It's one of those things where something bad will, you know, what is it called? No good deed goes unpunished. Like, you're always going to, with the acknowledgement of particular social issues, you're still going to have maybe the negative impact of seeing race to a disproportionately high rate. That's always just going to happen. But you still need to acknowledge them in a way where you understand that, like, there's a difference between systemic and individual.
Which is a controversial topic. We start by saying, of course you need identity politics. Identity politics is not a bad thing automatically.
You do need it to some extent.
Politics can be based on any distinction. It can be based on any group interest. So for gay students or black students or women to organize, that's identity politics. That's perfectly legitimate. The question is, how are they organizing? What's the overarching framework? And we've seen two versions of it in American history.
Sure.
You can do it the way most of the civil rights leaders did it, Martin Luther King in particular, where you draw a larger circle around the group, you emphasize what we have in common, and then you say, some of our brothers and sisters are being denied equal access, equal opportunity, or equal dignity.
Okay.
That works. That has worked historically in much tougher times and zones, and that works and will.
What's another example? Because it did work to an extent. Right, but my understanding is the only reason that we ended up passing like the Civil Rights Act or whatever is because we looked hypocritical in Vietnam, trying to spread democracy when we didn't even have it back home. So I'm not even sure if any type of, whether it even mattered what type of activism was being engaged in, or rather just something in general. But okay,
will work on college campuses. The other way you do it, which is growing on college campuses, is common enemy identity politics. It's based on the Bedouin notion, me against my brother, me and my brother against our cousin, me, my brother and cousin against the stranger. It's a very general principle of social psychology. If you try to unite people, let's all unite against them. They're the bad people. They're the cause of the problems. Let's all stick together. That's a really dangerous thing to do in a multi-ethnic society, especially in a university where we're actually all trying to work together to solve the problem. If we're creating multi-ethnic environments on campuses, and in most of our organizations we're struggling to increase diversity, what you should obviously be doing is turning down the tribal sentiments, is emphasizing what we have in common. Identity politics done with a common humanity frame is a good thing and is likely to work.
That makes sense, especially considering nowadays, like, we really don't, we don't really have like a common identity. You know, we don't really advocate for one. Like, a good common identity is being American, in America at least. But we don't really, people aren't really identifying as Americans nearly as much as they used to, which I think makes sense because systems only work, it hasn't worked for everybody. But we don't really do that. It's mostly just kind of like an antagonistic game almost.
Identity politics done by uniting everybody against the people with power and privilege, one race versus another race, one gender versus another gender. This is madness. This is a really bad idea if you're trying to emphasize and increase diversity and inclusion. We call that common enemy identity politics. Yeah. The more we encourage people to see the people around them as good versus evil, the harder it's going to be to create an inclusive, diverse environment.
Thank you. And very well said, John.
The video was really interesting. I liked it a lot more than I thought.